Captain Marcus Jensen regained consciousness slowly, his head pounding with each heartbeat. The metallic taste of blood lingered in his mouth, and a harsh blue light burned through his eyelids. He tried to move, only to discover his limbs were immobilized by smooth, cold restraints. Subject demonstrates rapid recovery from sedation. Noteworthy resilience, a clicking, multi-toned voice noted clinically. Marcus forced his eyes open. The chamber around him was pristine, all gleaming surfaces and precise angles. Equipment he couldn't begin to identify hummed softly, but it was the figure standing over him that seized his attention. He somehow knew it was female, stood nearly 7 feet tall. Her exoskeleton shimmered with iridescent blue-green plates that shifted with her movements. 4 arms operated various instruments with disturbing precision, while her primary limbs remained folded across her thorax. Most alien were her eyes, compound structures that fractured his reflection into countless tiny versions of himself, yet somehow conveyed intelligence that felt curious rather than cold. "You've damaged the specimen's epidermis during extraction, Miro," she chittered to an assistant Marcus couldn't see. "I specified minimal trauma protocols." The assistant's response was too quick and complex for Marcus to follow, their language a symphony of clicks, whistles, and subharmonic vibrations. "Unacceptable," the female replied. "Director Krax expects comprehensive baseline data. Contaminated results are worthless." Marcus swallowed painfully. "Water," he managed to rasp, uncertain if they could understand. The female scientist froze mid-gesture, her head tilting with an insect-like suddenness that sent chills down his spine. She approached, compound eyes examining him with renewed intensity. Conscious vocalization, earlier than predicted. Something like excitement colored her tone. She reached for a transparent container, filling it with clear liquid from a dispenser. Rather than release his restraints, she produced a flexible tube. "Hydration delivery system. Open your intake orifice, human." Despite the clinical approach, the water was cool and clean. Marcus drank gratefully, using the moment to organize his fragmented memories. The reconnaissance mission to Vexoria, the unexpected energy signature, the ambush while collecting samples. "My crew," he asked when she withdrew the tube. A moment of silence. "You arrived unaccompanied." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Standard protocol, he'd gone to the surface alone while the others remained in orbit. There was still hope. "I am Dr. Thelia Nix, Xenobiological Research Division," she announced, her mandibles moving in what might have been the Vexorian equivalent of professional pride. "You are the first live human specimen our facility has studied in 17 cycles." "Captain Marcus Jensen, Earth Exploratory Fleet," he countered, attempting to establish himself as more than a specimen. "And I'm not authorized to be anyone's research subject." Thelia made a sound that might have been laughter, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to surprise even her. She moved closer, one slender appendage activating a scanner that bathed Marcus in green light. "Fascinating. You believe authorization is relevant." She studied the resulting data with her secondary appendages while maintaining eye contact. "Your autonomy was forfeit upon trespassing in protected Vexorian space." "We had no indication this sector was claimed territory," Marcus argued, testing his restraint subtly. "Earth star charts show." "Your species' navigational knowledge is as limited as your evolutionary development," Thelia interrupted, though without the derision he might have expected. Instead, there was something almost gentle in her tone. "Yet you demonstrate remarkable linguistic adaptation. Most specimens require extensive processing before achieving rudimentary communication." Marcus noted her use of processing with alarm but kept his expression neutral. "Perhaps you've underestimated humans." For the first time, Thelia's professional demeanor faltered. She moved to a console and dimmed the overhead lights, easing the strain on his eyes, a small mercy he hadn't requested. "Perhaps," she acknowledged quietly, "that has been our gravest scientific error." Their eyes met across the laboratory, blue human irises reflecting in multifaceted alien orbs. In that moment, Marcus sensed something unexpected, not just scientific curiosity, but a deeper, more dangerous interest that neither species had terminology to define. The door membrane rippled as another Vexorian entered, taller and bearing red markings on its exoskeleton. "Dr. Nix, the director requires your preliminary assessment," the newcomer announced. Thelia straightened, professionalism instantly restored. Informed director cracks that the human specimen exceeds baseline parameters. I require extended study before invasive procedures. As she turned to leave, her lower appendage briefly, almost imperceptibly, adjusted the environmental controls. The chamber's temperature rose to a more comfortable level for human physiology. "Rest, specimen," she instructed, but the subtle softening of her subharmonics told Marcus what her words could not. He had found an unexpected ally in a very dangerous place. 23 days into his captivity, Marcus sat cross-legged on the laboratory floor, watching Thelia manipulate holographic representations of his cellular structure. His restraints had been replaced with a proximity field that allowed limited movement within a designated area, a concession Thelia had justified as necessary for accurate behavioral observation. "This protein interaction doesn't match our previous human data," she commented, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Your immune response is exceptional." Marcus smiled faintly. "I've been told I'm stubborn down to my cells." Thelia tilted her head, a gesture he now recognized as amusement. Over the past weeks, she had gradually introduced him to Vexorian language basics, and he had reciprocated with English lessons. These exchanges, supposedly for research purposes, had evolved into genuine conversations during her increasingly frequent night shifts when they were alone. "Stubborn," she repeated in English, her mouthparts shaping the unfamiliar word with surprising dexterity. "An advantageous trait for a specimen in your position." "Person," Marcus corrected gently, "not specimen." Thelia's iridescent carapace shifted colors slightly, a physiological response he'd come to recognize as discomfort or conflict. She reduced the volume of the laboratory's monitoring systems before approaching his containment field. "Person," she acknowledged, switching to English. "Marcus." It was the first time she'd used his name rather than his designation. The moment hung between them, significant in ways neither fully understood. "The director has requested accelerated testing protocols," she said, reverting to her native tongue and formal tone. "Dr. Vorek's advocates for invasive neural mapping." Marcus felt a chill at the clinical euphemism. "That would kill me." Yes, her compound eyes didn't blink as humans did, but he sensed her distress in the subtle movements of her secondary limbs. "I have delayed by citing contamination concerns, but cannot do so indefinitely." He stood, moving to the edge of his containment field, mere inches from where she stood. "Why are you telling me this, Thelia?" The use of her name, forbidden familiarity between researcher and subject, caused her exoskeleton to flush with a pale luminescence. She glanced at the disabled monitoring devices before making a decision. Her primary appendage reached toward a console, and the containment field dimmed. "Tonight I will show you something no human has seen," she said, her multi-layered voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "It may help you understand why you are here." Hours later, when the facility entered its nocturnal cycle, Thelia returned alone. She led Marcus through eerily empty corridors to a secure archive chamber. Her access codes unlocked historical records that played across crystalline displays, the first contact between humans and Vexorians 80 years earlier, the catastrophic misunderstanding that followed, the classified research program studying human biology for military applications. "We believed your species simple and aggressive," Thelia explained as the images faded. "These assumptions informed all subsequent scientific models." Marcus watched her with new understanding. "And you've begun to question those models. Your neurological complexity exceeds our theoretical framework." Her appendages moved in agitation. "Your emotional responses, they resonate in unexpected ways." "What ways?" Marcus stepped closer, ignoring years of Space Corps training that warned against such proximity to an alien being. Thelia's exoskeleton pulsed with soft bioluminescence. "Vexorians process emotions biochemically, collectively. Individual attachment is underdeveloped in our species." "Yet you feel something for me." The words emerged before he could reconsider them. Her compound eyes reflected his image 1,000 times over. "I experience disruption when calculating harm to you. My research focus has become compromised." Her voice dropped to its lowest harmonic register. "I falsify data to prevent invasive procedures, Marcus. I violate scientific principles. This is unprecedented." The confession hung between them, dangerous and profound. Marcus reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her time to retreat. She remained motionless as his fingers made contact with her exoskeleton, tracing the intricate patterns that glowed brighter at his touch. "On Earth," he said softly, "we have a word for what happens when two beings form a connection that defies rational explanation." Thelia's appendages trembled slightly. What word? Before he could answer, the laboratory door membrane rippled. They separated instantly, but not quickly enough. Dr. Vorex stood in the entrance, his red-marked exoskeleton rigid with what could only be shock. "Director Krax will find this observation most illuminating, Dr. Nix," he announced, mandibles clicking in sharp disapproval. As Vorex departed, Thelia's compound eyes fixed on Marcus with an emotion he finally recognized, despite the vast evolutionary distance between them. "Fear. Your actions constitute a serious breach of scientific protocol, Dr. Nix." Director Krax loomed over Thelia, his massive exoskeleton bearing the ornate markings of Vexoria's scientific elite. "Explain your unauthorized proximity to the human specimen." They stood in Krax's private chamber, its walls lined with preserved specimens from a dozen worlds. Among them, Thelia noticed with revulsion, was a human neural system suspended in crystalline fluid. "I was conducting empathic response testing," she replied, keeping her subharmonics steady despite her interior turmoil. "The human's psychological state affects cellular function. Physical proximity yields more accurate readings." Krax's antennae vibrated skeptically. "Dr. Vorex reports the specimen was unrestrained. You disabled surveillance systems." "Observation effects. The human's awareness of monitoring alters results." "You use human terminology," Krax noted coldly. "You called it by its designation name rather than its specimen classification." Thelia suppressed the color change that would betray her emotional state. Tactical approach to elicit cooperation. For 7 nerve-wracking minutes, Krax circled her, compound eyes assessing her from multiple angles. Finally, he activated a hollow display showing Marcus in his containment field, now fully activated and reduced to half its previous size. "The specimen has been rescheduled for complete neural extraction. Tomorrow." Krax's mandibles clicked with finality. "The Military Advancement Division requires comprehensive data on human cognitive mapping. Your research period is terminated." "Director, premature termination will compromise." "You are removed from the project, effective immediately." Krax's voice carried the subharmonic of absolute authority. "Your research will be reviewed for contamination. Report to biological decontamination." Thelia stood motionless as Krax departed, leaving her alone with the hollow image of Marcus packing his confinement field. Her exoskeleton burned with a riot of colors she couldn't suppress. Grief, rage, and something more profound she had no Vexorian word to describe. The decontamination process was thorough, but ultimately futile. No amount of molecular purging could excise what had taken root within her. After her release, Thelia waited until the night cycle before using her still-active credentials to access the laboratory one last time. Marcus looked up as she entered, hope briefly illuminating his features before comprehension dawned. "They've removed you from the project." "Yes," she approached his containment field, no longer caring about surveillance. "Tomorrow they will extract your neural tissue for military applications." His face, so expressively human, registered shock, then resignation. "I always knew that was a possibility." "I attempted to prevent this outcome," her voice modulated into the deepest registers of sorrow. "I have failed." Marcus moved to the edge of his containment field. "You risked everything to treat me as a person, not a specimen. That matters, Thelia." She deactivated the field, an act of open rebellion now that consequences no longer mattered. As the shimmering barrier dissipated, Marcus stepped forward, crossing the boundary that had separated their worlds. "In my culture," he said gently, "we believe that connection between souls transcends physical forms." Thelia's compound eyes focused on him with painful intensity. "Vexorians consider the concept of individual souls primitive." "And yet," he reached toward her face, fingers hovering just above her iridescent carapace, "you're here breaking every rule of your society." "I experience dysfunction when contemplating your termination." Her appendages trembled, betraying emotion her species rarely acknowledged. "It is unprofessional." Marcus smiled sadly. I believe humans and Vexorians have different words for the same feeling. Then, with deliberate gentleness, he pressed his lips to the smooth surface of her upper carapace in what his species called a kiss. The contact sent cascades of bioluminescent waves across her exoskeleton, a visible manifestation of biochemical response her kind typically experienced only during reproduction cycles. Thelia's multiple limbs involuntarily enfolded him, their bodies connecting in ways that defied xenobiological taxonomy. Her scientist's mind registered the impossible harmony of their disparate physiologies, his warm softness against her articulated hardness, his singular heartbeat echoing her multiple cardiac chambers. I did not know, she whispered against his neck, that such connection was possible. When they separated, Marcus kept his hand against her face. What happens now? Thelia's compound eyes reflected his image countless times as biochemical certainty flooded her system. Now I make an unprecedented claim. The Vexorian High Council chamber hummed with the agitated vibrations of 24 scientific elites. At the center of the amphitheater, Director Crax's exoskeleton bristled with aggressive red bioluminescence as he faced Thelia across the ceremonial knowledge circle. Dr. Nix invokes Statute 7V Omega of our scientific principles, he announced, mandibles clicking with barely controlled fury. A claim of exclusive research sovereignty over a specimen designated for terminal study. The council members' collective antennae twitched in surprise. The statute in question was ancient, rarely invoked, dating back to the early days of Vexorian scientific exploration when researchers competed for limited specimens. High Counselor Zex, her enormous carapace bearing the gold traceries of scientific wisdom, leaned forward. On what grounds do you make this unprecedented claim, Dr. Nix? Thelia stood with perfect stillness, her exoskeleton deliberately muted to project professional detachment. The human specimen possesses unique neurological properties that cannot be properly analyzed through conventional dissection. I propose long-term integrative study. Specify these properties, demanded Counselor Vrall, his skepticism evident in his harmonic undertones. The human demonstrates cognitive adaptability exceeding all previous models, Thelia replied, activating a holographic display of Marcus's neural scans. More significantly, he exhibits interspecies empathic resonance previously considered biologically impossible. Director Crax interrupted with a sharp clicking. Dr. Nix fails to mention her compromised objectivity. She has formed inappropriate proximity bonds with the specimen. A wave of vibrations, the Vexorian equivalent of shocked murmurs, rippled through the chamber. Thelia's compound eyes fixed on Crax with unflinching intensity. My proximity has revealed revolutionary findings about human consciousness that conventional distance protocols obscured. What specifically do you propose? Asked Counselor Zex. Thelia's exoskeleton briefly pulsed with color before she steadied herself. I claim the human Marcus Jensen as my permanent research subject through the bond of scientific pairing. The chamber erupted in harmonic chaos. Scientific pairing, a form of exclusive research relationship, had never been applied to an alien specimen, much less one designated for terminal study. This is unprecedented. Crax's mandibles clicked violently. The human is scheduled for neural extraction to benefit our military applications division. Which brings us to a more troubling matter, Thelia continued calmly, activating a second holographic display showing classified military documents. These directives reveal the true purpose of human neural extraction, development of biological weapons targeted at Earth colonies. The council chamber fell silent as the implications registered. Such weapons would violate the interstellar conventions Vexoria had publicly endorsed. How did you access classified military directives? Counselor Zex's question carried dangerous undertones. The human assisted me, Thelia admitted, triggering another wave of harmonic exclamations. Demonstrating both cognitive abilities and ethical reasoning that challenge our classification of his species as primitive. Bring the specimen forward, ordered Counselor Zex after conferring with her colleagues. Guards escorted Marcus into the chamber. Despite the gravity of the situation, Thelia felt an involuntary flush of color across her carapace at the sight of him, dignified despite his captivity. his strange, soft features now painfully dear to her. "Human," addressed Counselor Zex, "you understand the nature of Dr. Nix's claim." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "She offers me life instead of dissection through a form of research bond." "The arrangement would not be temporary," warned Vrall. "You would remain under permanent study." "With Dr. Nix specifically," Marcus clarified. "That is her claim." Marcus's eyes met Thelia's compound gaze across the knowledge circle. "I consent to this arrangement." Crack stepped forward aggressively. "The specimen cannot consent, it lacks legal standing. Yet it demonstrates cognitive reasoning and linguistic mastery of our most complex concepts," observed Zex. "Perhaps our classification requires revision." The council withdrew for deliberation, leaving Thelia and Marcus momentarily unobserved in the chamber's anteroom. "If this fails," she whispered in English, her mouthparts forming the alien words with newfound fluency, "I have arranged alternative measures." Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly. "And if it succeeds?" Thelia's exoskeleton shimmered with complex patterns that expressed what Vexorian language could not. "We will pioneer a new form of xenobiological understanding." His fingertips brushed against her appendage, sending cascades of sensation through her neural pathways. "Is that the only form of understanding we'll pioneer?" Before she could respond, the council returned. Counselor Zex's imposing figure dominated the chamber as she delivered their verdict. "The council provisionally grants Dr. Nix's claim of scientific pairing with the human specimen, with quarterly reviews of research outcomes." Her compound eyes fixed on Thelia. "However, this unprecedented arrangement will be conducted under strict oversight at the Central Research Facility." Thelia's hopes collapsed. The Central Facility was directly controlled by the military division. Before she could protest, Marcus spoke, his voice clear and strong in flawless Vexorian. "Honored Council, I must respectfully correct a misunderstanding. According to Vexorian scientific principle 3R Delta, which I accessed during my time in Dr. Nix's laboratory, scientific pairing grants autonomy of research environment to ensure uncontaminated results." The council chamber vibrated with astonishment at a human citing their ancient scientific principles in their own language. Counselor Zex's antennae twitched with undisguised surprise. "Your knowledge of our principles is unexpected. As is your species' apparent violation of interstellar weapons conventions," Marcus countered boldly. "A matter my government would find concerning." The implied threat hung in the air, creating ripples of harmonic tension throughout the chamber. Director Cracks surged forward, mandibles raised aggressively. "This proves the danger. The human threatens our security." "The human exposes our hypocrisy," corrected Counselor Zex, her gold-traced carapace gleaming under the chamber lights, "and demonstrates precisely the complexity Dr. Nix claims." She turned to Thelia, her compound eyes unreadable. "Your claim is granted with amended terms. You may conduct your research independently, but will submit comprehensive quarterly reports. The human remains your responsibility and liability." As guards escorted them from the chamber, Thelia's exoskeleton pulsed with colors visible only to Marcus. Not the cool hues of scientific detachment, but the warm spectrum of something the Vexorians had no name for, but humans called love. The research outpost Thelia had selected orbited a dwarf star at the edge of Vexorian space. Its isolation suited their purposes, both the official research and what transpired beyond the meticulous reports she submitted to the council. 6 months into their unprecedented arrangement, Marcus stood at the viewing portal, watching distant galaxies spiral through the void. The quarters they shared reflected their evolving relationship, Vexorian crystalline structures interspersed with items manufactured for human comfort. "Your cellular adaptation continues to exceed predictions," Thelia noted, entering with data crystals containing her latest findings. "Exposure to Vexorian biochemical compounds appears to enhance your immune response rather than compromise it." Marcus smiled at her scientific formality, a habit she maintained even as other boundaries between them dissolved. "Is that your way of saying I'm becoming more like you?" Thelia's exoskeleton rippled with iridescent patterns that had become her unique expression of affection. "Convergent adaptation, fascinating from a xenobiological perspective." And from other perspectives. He approached her, tracing the now familiar contours of her carapace with practiced fingers. Over months of proximity, they had discovered unexpected compatibilities between their physiologies. Her exoskeleton's sensory receptors responded to his touch with cascades of neurochemical pleasure. His skin absorbed the subtle biochemicals her body released during emotional states, creating a feedback loop of sensation neither species had evolved to experience, but both had adapted to crave. Multiple perspectives warrant extensive exploration, she replied, her multi-layered voice dropping to harmonics that made his body respond in ways that still amazed them both. The communication panel chimed, interrupting their increasingly intimate exchange. Thelia reluctantly disengaged to activate the secure channel they maintained with her former colleague, Dr. Kell, one of the few Vexorian scientists sympathetic to their cause. Kell's iridescent face appeared, mandibles clicking in the rapid pattern of urgency. Director Krax has convinced the military council that your research should be reclaimed. They dispatched retrieval units. Projected arrival, 14 hours. Marcus felt his blood chill. On what grounds? Your last transmission contained evidence of genetic communication between species, Kell explained, antennae twitching nervously. Krax claims this represents unprecedented biological risk requiring containment. Thelia's exoskeleton darkened with anger. The risk is to his weapons program, not to Vexorian security. Precisely, agreed Kell. A growing faction within the scientific council questions his methods, but the military division operates independently. You must implement your contingency measures. After Kell's transmission ended, Thelia and Marcus moved with the coordinated efficiency of two beings who had learned to function as one. While she downloaded crucial research data, he activated the station's defensive countermeasures and prepared the modified shuttle they had spent months secretly adapting. The transmission to Earth authorities is prepared, Marcus confirmed, securing provisions in the craft's storage compartments. Once sent, both our species will know about the biological weapons program. Thelia paused in her work, compound eyes fixed on him with an intensity that still made his heart race. The diplomatic fallout will be severe. Your people may never trust mine. Some will, he countered, reaching for her appendage. Just as some of yours understand what we've proven here. Her exoskeleton pulsed with complex patterns of doubt and resolution. That different forms of consciousness can connect, that evolution can take unexpected paths toward convergence. That love can exist beyond the boundaries of biology. His fingers intertwined with her alien appendages in the gesture that had become their private symbol. Thelia's scientist mind had initially rejected the human concept of love as simplistic, but experience had taught her otherwise. The neurochemical responses, the physiological adaptations, the behavioral changes, all pointed to something profound that transcended both their species' understanding. 12 hours later, their shuttle accelerated away from the research station just as Vexorian military vessels emerged from subspace. Director Krax's furious transmission filled their communication system. Your actions constitute treason against Vexorian security, Dr. Nix. Surrender the human specimen and all research data immediately. Thelia activated the transmission she and Marcus had prepared, sending comprehensive evidence of the illegal weapons programmed simultaneously to Earth authorities and to the progressive faction of the Vexorian Scientific Council. Your weapons program is now exposed, Director, she replied calmly. Your definition of security is obsolete. As Krax's threats faded into static, their shuttle entered the coordinates Marcus had provided, a neural pathway through space that Vexorian navigational science had never mapped. His knowledge and her technology combined in ways neither civilization had imagined possible. In the quiet of their small vessel, Marcus's arms encircled Thelia's exoskeleton from behind, their bodies finding the harmonious connection that defied xenobiological precedent. Her compound eyes gazed forward into the unknown expanse before them. Where shall we go? She asked, her scientist's mind exhilarated by unbounded possibilities. Marcus's lips brushed against the sensitive juncture of her carapace plates, sending pleasurable vibrations through her neural network. There's a region between our territories, unclaimed space where others like us might find sanctuary. Others like us, Thelia repeated, her multi-toned voice contemplative. You believe we are not unique. I believe what we've discovered is just the beginning. His fingers traced the glowing patterns of her exoskeleton, now permanently altered by their bond. There must be other species questioning the boundaries we're taught to accept. As their shuttle accelerated toward the uncharted region of space that would become their new laboratory, Thelia's scientist mind cataloged the unpredictable variables of their future. Diplomatic consequences, biological adaptations, the potential for other interspecies connections. Yet beneath these analytical calculations pulsed the certainty that had transformed her understanding of consciousness itself. That connection could transcend evolutionary divides, that barriers of biology could yield to something more powerful than either species had evolved to comprehend. A new field of study, she noted, her exoskeleton glowing with the colors Marcus had taught her to express. And much more, he added, his familiar touch completing circuits of sensation that made her feel simultaneously alien and home. As their small vessel vanished into the depths of uncharted space, they carried with them the most revolutionary discovery either civilization had encountered. Not the weapons Krax had sought, nor the pure science Thelia had once pursued, but the profound revelation that love, in its most essential form, might be the one truly universal constant in an infinite cosmos.